All right, ladies and gentlemen, today I get to introduce you to someone from my hometown. This is Chris Noeller. Chris is the chief with Pueblo Police, has been with Pueblo Police Department for 27 years. Currently the chief. You were the interim chief before and started as chief in August of 2021. For those of you who know nothing about Pueblo, it's 112,000 people, steel town, got a steel mill in it, kind of a blue collar area, about 30, 40 minutes from the mountains.
Home of the slopper. Don't forget the slopper.
That's right, man. Best green chili in the world. I don't care what anyone says. And so your department, you have 308 sworn in civilians that are working with you. So pretty significant size. Couple other things about Chief Noeller before I ask him a little bit about himself. Some of the roles you've served in: Deputy Chief of Operations, Patrol Watch Commander, SWAT Team Leader, Sergeant over Traffic, DA Task Force Officer, Narcotics Detective. So you've been through just about like all of the different parts of law enforcement, which is really cool, all within Pueblo Police. 6 years as a firearm instructor with Pueblo Community College, veteran, Navy Reserves, Master of Arms and a sonar tech for subs. And then you started out your career in Louisville, Colorado as a patrol officer. So wife and 4 kids. So there's the quick kind of intro. So Chris, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? What you like besides sloppers, like what your hobbies are, that kind of stuff. And then we'll jump into some questions.
Yeah, I was pretty fortunate. My father was in the military, so we got to travel around quite a bit. I was born in Nebraska and got to live in Japan for 6 years as a kid and moved
Nice. Where at in Japan?
Masawa on the north end of the
Really?
mainland.
Dude, I was stationed up there for 2 years. I
Oh,
didn't
you
know
kidding me?
that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. My dad was stationed there. We were there from, and this is early in my life. So I think 73, 74-ish to 70.
okay.
I think we got back to the States in 77.
Nice. I was not there in the 70s. I went there in
Okay.
the 90s.
Yeah. So he was stationed out there. I remember the ice festivals and the snow statues and whatever that they made. I don't know if they're still doing that when you were
Oh
out
yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. That was a big deal up there.
there. Yeah. Then we came back. He got stationed at NORAD. So we were there in Colorado Springs, and then he got stationed at Nellis Air Force Base. He worked at Tonopah Test Range on the Stealth Project back when it was a classified program. And then he retired, and we moved back here.
Nice.
So yeah, I've kind of been fortunate. Got to move around a lot and see different things, which I think gives me a unique perspective in my position. Getting to interact with different cultures and thought processes and stuff like that. So been a cop for altogether about 29, a little over 29 years.
3 decades.
And that's an interesting story too. I never wanted to be a cop. I didn't want to not be a cop. I just never thought about being a cop. I wanted to be a pilot, but I didn't want to do the work it took to be a fighter pilot. I didn't want to do the math and study and all those things. So my brother-in-law said, "Hey, why don't you come to the police academy with me?" So I thought, I could do that for a few years and go get my pilot's licenses and stuff like that. Because by then my eyesight had gotten to where I couldn't be a military pilot, even if I wanted to. So I got started in it, and man, next thing I know, 29 years have passed, and I've loved every minute of it.
That's awesome. Did you ever get your pilot's license, your private pilot license?
I worked on it a little bit. My private, I've probably got about 30 hours towards my private pilot's license, but
okay, cool.
Money and kids and all those things kind of put the stops on that.
Yeah. So if somebody doesn't know anything about Pueblo besides the green chili, like what are a couple of the other things about Pueblo that make it pretty unique? Because my experience, I've lived 3 different continents all over the place, but Pueblo is just this unique town in Colorado. Yes. And what are some of the things that you would describe it as?
I think there's just a mindset down here. You look at the and this is as a non-native Puebloan. You look at the Front Range. Colorado Springs is the next largest city. It's about 40 minutes north of here. Denver is about 2 hours away, so we're kind of isolated down here. We're not a small city, but we're not a giant city. The steel mill has had a huge imprint, I think, on the
you're okay.
Has had a huge imprint on our community, the blue collar kind of a mindset. And it's just full of a bunch of good people that are it's a big town with small town kind of values. People know everybody. I promise my wife is from here, and we can't walk more than 5 feet at a time in the state fair without her running into somebody that she knows,
Yeah.
because she's just she knows everybody in town. And
Yeah.
that's just kind of the way Pueblo is. And I think that's what makes it so unique. There's a
Yeah.
lot of cool stuff here. We're close enough. You can go to the mountains and go skiing in about an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours. We got a big reservoir here. So there's a lot of stuff to do outside, some pretty upscale mountain bike trails that are around that area. We've got a really cool river walk that's downtown. So it's just it is, and you hit it right on the head. I've been all over the world, and well, not all over the world. I've been to a lot of different places, and I've never lived in a community that's like Pueblo.
Yeah.
For all the right reasons.
Yeah, when you think of the law enforcement aspect of it, what are the challenges that you guys face in Pueblo law enforcement wise? What's your call volume like? What are the types of calls that you guys tend to hit on most?
Yeah, our call volume is pretty high. We handle about 140,000 calls for service a year.
Okay.
We've started using CompStat down here, so we're tracking some things, and it's interesting. The tail end of this summer, we were handling about 16 calls per service an hour,
Yeah.
which is an intense volume, especially given our manpower struggles right now, like everybody else in the world. So our call volume is pretty high. Our violent crime is obviously higher than we'd like it to be. We're unfortunately well known for auto thefts in the country. I think we're in the top 10 for auto thefts right now. So there's a lot of issues. There's some generational gang issues in town.
Yeah.
But it's that being said, it's still a good community.
Right. Well, and you guys have done a tremendous amount of work on the gang side, because I know early 90s, I mean, it was just out of control. And
Right.
some of the times I'd come back from being in the military, and I remember getting off the plane and my family telling me, don't look out the window and don't make eye contact. And I'm like, what are you talking about? This is Pueblo. And they're like, no, I'm telling you it's bad. And that's changed dramatically. So, I mean, you guys have had a really positive impact on some of that stuff.
Yeah, we have, and we've also done a great job over the last, if I could say so myself, over the last 12 or 13 years in building a better, positive relationship with our community.
Yeah.
There was a while there where we had a pretty poor reputation in our community, and I think since about 2010, 2011, we've worked really hard as an organization to change that, and be more transparent and more work with our community and not see our community as a separate entity.
Yeah.
So I think that's helped a lot in those areas too.
Yeah.
We do still have the gang issues, but yeah, I started in '96, so I kind of remember some of that. It was already on the tail end of that, I think, when I started in '96, but it was pretty dramatic.
Yeah. Well, what are a couple things you've learned throughout your law enforcement career, whether it's personally, professionally, as a leader? What are a couple of lessons that you pick up and you're like, man, this has deeply impacted me?
I think over my career, as far as myself, I've changed quite a bit as an individual, and I've learned that you can't let outside influences direct what you do. You have to be true to yourself. You have to be grounded in the ethics and the morals that you were brought up in, and apply those throughout your career. And I think as we move into this new era of law enforcement, that becomes even more important, to be really strongly ethically and morally grounded. And I think, growing and maturing as a police officer, I say it all the time when I talk about the younger officers. They aren't necessarily young in age, they're young in experience. And I think when you going through this job, and especially giving a young man or a woman, 21 or 22, 23, 24, giving them the responsibility and the authority that we have, it's important for us as leaders to make sure that we're also giving them the moral expectations and the ethical expectations that come along with that. And I think that's one of the things that I took me a while to figure out as a younger cop. I mean, um, and then as I grew as a leader, understanding my role in that, and making sure that that happens. It doesn't just happen in a vacuum. Leaders have to drive those expectations and demand that provide what they are, but then demand that they're adhered to.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, right, it's that idea of providing the space and the training so that people who haven't yet developed those virtues and values can go, okay, hey, I have time to work on them. I can figure out what's important to me. I think what's interesting, I'm noticing across the law enforcement community across the country that some departments are turning to 30-year-olds and 35-year-olds and 40-year-olds, and they're bringing them on as rookies, going, hey, there's value there as well because you've worked through some of that. And I, at least for me, that's a new perspective in policing, because I always thought it's a young man's game, it's a young lady's game, they get in young. But I'm seeing some departments take on kind of midlife people, and the value they bring is really kind of surprising. You know, that hey, I've lived a little while, I've been through some stuff. Their grace and empathy seem a little different. So that's been one of the things. I don't know how that is in the Pueblo PD, but some of the other departments I've interacted with, I've been a little surprised by that.
Right. Well, right now I'd take anybody. I don't care how old you are. You know, as long as you're a good person and those kind of things. If you're 80 and you want to come down here, I think I'd take you. Right?
That's awesome.
I'm not sure you would enjoy it as much as
getting in and out of the car is going to be a problem.
And chasing those little young kids around is not all it's cracked up to be anymore. But yeah, I think there's some truth to that. I mean, just looking back on my own career, I think you know, had I been a little bit older when I started, I might have the early part of my career might have been a little bit different than it turned out to be. But you know, I think it's also important to note as you grow in a job or you grow as a human being, you can't wish away mistakes that you've made, because if you're doing it the right way, it's going to make you a better human being, and it's going to make you a stronger individual. If you take those mistakes and you grow from them. I think the part that worries me right now is we're in a zero defect world where my younger officers within, and I'm not talking about the ludicrous extreme that we see like in Memphis, but you know, you get officers right now that make a mistake and nobody will let go of it. You know, we had an incident here where a cop put a guy, one of those First Amendment auditors, in some handcuffs for a few minutes, and he shouldn't have. We addressed it with training. We dealt with the issue. That was 7 years ago. We're still hearing about it. I mean, at what point do we have grace for people that make a mistake? And that's what I try to teach my officers, and that's what we try to talk about as an organization is having grace. Now, there's, you know, discipline's got to happen. I mean, sometimes people do need to be fired, and sometimes people do things which are unforgivable. But that's so rare. And in this time, when we can't get people to come be a police officer, I mean, if police chiefs fired every employee that somebody said should be fired, there would be no cops in this country.
Right.
There are certainly, don't misunderstand me, there are things that you should absolutely be fired for. You know, untruthfulness, you know, obviously what happened in Memphis and some other places, those are the unforgivable things.
Right. I heard somebody say recently, they said in law enforcement, almost anything survivable except a lie.
Yeah.
I mean, really that, you know.
Well, and you know, beating a guy to death in Memphis would be one other thing, but you know, yeah, I mean, and it really is, and you can use it as a great learning tool. You know, and the incident that I brought up with our officer, we use that as an incredible teaching tool for the other 200 officers that are working here. And you know, what infuriates me is that people still call this department about that, wanting him fired over a deal that happened 6 years ago.
Right.
And you know, I mean, I think it's fair to say that the gentleman that got handcuffed, it paid well. For that time period. So I mean,
I just can't imagine the pressure on especially younger cops, male and female. Like I mean, if you fail, it's on video, it's recorded, it's in the news. I mean, I can't imagine. I remember being a pastor for 30 years, and we had to be real careful what we said and did because everyone watched it. But not to the degree now where, I mean, there's a camera around every corner. And while I'm all about, hey, do your job, do it well, to not be able to fail as you're learning, I mean,
Right.
that's got to be so much pressure on them.
Right. Well, think about this, and this is what I say when people bring up those body worn cameras. There's not another occupation on the planet where from the minute you get to work to the
Yeah.
minute you go home, 4 days a week, 10 hours a day, 365 days a year, every word you utter that is not inside the building amongst ourselves is captured on audio.
Yeah.
You show me the employee in any industry that could survive that for 1 year and
Yeah.
not get fired for talking to a customer poorly or whatever. And that's the level of scrutiny our officers are tied to. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't be scrutinized.
Right.
What I'm saying is when an officer makes a mistake, you got to have some grace. We will deal with it internally. We will, if it's a pure training issue, we will make sure they get the training they need. If it's a disciplinary matter, I'm confident that my fellow chiefs and I will discipline those individuals at an appropriate level. But there's not another person that could survive that level of scrutiny for 25 years.
Yeah.
And that's what our officers are going to be facing as they move forward. Everything they say is going to be captured on audio and video and scrutinized by individuals at home on a couch eating their popcorn and not in the midst of the struggle that's going on the street.
Yeah, and my personal safety and the safety of my other officers and your safety are all played into that as well. If you could provide anything for younger officers right now, what's something that you would give them? Like money wasn't an issue, training wasn't an issue, time wasn't an issue. What's the thing that you would give them that maybe they would bless them the most?
If all those things weren't an issue, I think what I would try to do is get them the opportunity to do physical training on duty. If you had the ability to give them an hour to go ride the bike or go lift weights or something like that. What I would also like to see is our ability to implement defensive tactics training more frequently.
Yeah.
That's the one thing. I mean, and it's a detriment to the officers out there. We don't have the time or bandwidth to do more repetitive defensive tactics training. And that's one of the things I think that we've got to look at somehow changing in our profession is the type of defensive tactics training that we do and the frequency at which we do it. We about a year, it's been a little over a year ago now. I tried to change what we do inside our post academy to do less strike heavy defensive tactics. We have, you see some of the stuff on TV where officers are striking individuals, punching them in the head or in the body. There are tactics that are taught to officers that teach that is a good tactic. Good tactic's not the right word, but a authorized technique to get somebody to comply. And it does work. And look, there's a time where that's what's got to happen.
Sure.
I mean, use of force is ugly. There's no way for me to make it look pretty. When you're trying to get somebody to do something they don't want to do and they're resisting, you've got to use physical force to make it happen.
Right.
But what we tried to do about a year ago in our police academy was move to a more jujitsu based. It's called Gracie survival tactics, and more jujitsu based techniques. And got into a little bit of trouble with post because I didn't go about it the right way. We've since worked that out. We're still using a different technique that I don't want to really go into that still teaches the strikes in the academy, but we've sent our officers, our defensive tactics instructors to that Gracie survival tactics class. And we're going to, starting in March, that's the technique that we're going to start using as a department. So we'll have to teach them the one brand for right now in the academy. And then once they're they've graduated and are post-certified, we're going to send them to this Gracie survival tactics program.
It's awesome. And you hit on something that's critical though, right? It's repetition. So I've got a couple black belts and I used to train, and the initial training is nice, but it only makes you dangerous to yourself and everybody else. And it's that repetition that goes, hey, I know how to do it in a way that gets compliance without bringing injury. And so I do think, where you're going, man, we've got to figure out how to give them the repetition, and we can't always expect our law enforcement will just do it on the side. You're
Right.
putting in your 40 and then going, well, you be fit and you do this and you do that. Figuring out how to provide it on the clock, I think, is critical. I was talking to a fire chief, and he was talking about mental health. And he said, one of the things we do is, he goes, before they go home on the clock, we have an equestrian center we're attached to, and they can go pet horses and walk on trails. And he goes, but we decided that's something we needed to provide, instead of just going, hey, it's out there and you go do it if you want to. And so, yeah, I love that idea. How about anything inside of law enforcement that needs attention that you see, that you're like, hey, as a culture, we need to address this?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. I think the defensive tactics. I think we need to be more open-minded to what defensive tactics we're using, and why we're using them, and what the end results are. You look at, and again, I'm going to tell you right now, there is a time and a place to punch somebody in the head as hard as you can. There just is, and people don't want to hear that, but it's the truth.
Sure.
But the reality of it is, though, there are other techniques we can teach, like Gracie survival tactics. And I'm not getting any money from them. It's just a program I think that works for us and gives us what we want. But where we can use other techniques and not have to punch somebody in the head all the time, or in the side to get compliance. There's other things we can do. And I think as a profession, we need to start looking for those. I think the other thing we need to do is get post, and I have a good relationship with our post director and our post here in Colorado, but I think one of the things that's problematic is that it's a kind of a bureaucracy, and like all great bureaucracies, you can't turn them around quickly. So getting changes implemented into the academy process takes a little longer than I think it ought to. Now, I think the counter argument is that prevents chief from going off the rails and using ninjutsu or some other crazy stuff to teach their officers. And I think there's some utility in that. But I think we've got to be a little bit more nimble as a profession, looking at what's going on and ways to mitigate that. Like I said, use of force is ugly, and it's always going to be ugly. But some of it is uglier than it needs to be, and that's not our officers' fault. That's because us as administrators are too slow, and the bureaucracies we're surrounded by are too slow to adapt and try new methods. So I think that defensive tactics is one area, and the speed at which we adapt needs to change. And us in the leadership need to be more vocal in making that happen. Another area I think right now we're seeing, at least in our state, is some of this crime that is, or this legislation that is just really soft on crime. We had 3 years of double-digit crime reductions in Part 1 crimes leading up to 2020. After COVID, some of the legislation that's come about since George Floyd and some other incidents that have happened, and now we have had 2 solid years of double-digit increases in Part 1 crime, and we just can't keep suspects in jail for any length of time whatsoever, and something's got to change. And I think law enforcement leaders need to step up and be a little bit more vocal in how those things are impacting it. The problem is, as a sheriff, you can do that. You're an elected official. It's a lot more tenuous when you're a municipal law enforcement chief, working at the will of a mayor to have that ability. And I think we need to be wise about what it is we rail against or speak out against, but we've got to be able to do that, because it is destroying the morale of our organizations. When officers see the same guy over and over and over again being arrested and released and nothing is happening. I'll give you a perfect example. In Colorado right now, a felony theft level is $2,000. Anything below that is a misdemeanor. We just I have a friend that works at the mall and had a bunch of stuff stolen at the mall, and she was talking to the lady that had stolen it, and the lady traveled all the way from Las Vegas, Nevada to here to steal because she knew it wouldn't be a felony.
I tell you my experience with it. So I ride with chaplains out of Colorado Springs all the time. I'll put in about 20, 30 hours a week with them. And we had a DUI the other day, and long drawn out situation. But I was asking the officers, I said, so what are the charges? And they're telling me, they said, well, the DUI is a misdemeanor. I was like, well, man, he crashed through traffic. He put his car on the side. And they said, yep, that's a misdemeanor. They said, now the felony is he stole her phone. And I thought, wow, man, we do have something a little mixed up when the stealing the phone is the felony. And the DUI that almost took people's lives is a misdemeanor, who is like, well, if they stack, then eventually we'll get to them. And just, I mean,
Well, that must have been a really expensive phone, because it would
right.
have to be over $2,000 for it to be a felony.
Yeah, yeah. But that kind of how we've got it so twisted right now, and asking, and I'll ask those officers, how is that? And they're like, it's frustrating, because they're going, hey, I don't want to go out and arrest everybody, but I do want to arrest the right people. And they're like, but it's hard to get the right people off the road and to keep them, off. And they said, and it comes back to some of the legislation, which, at least from my point of view, is an overreaction, and that tends to be our way in America, as we overcorrect, and finding that middle ground of going, hey, listen, I think every good cop I know wants policing to be better. And they're like, here's how we can make it better. And, I always hear the statement from cops, nobody hates a bad cop more than a good cop,
Right.
and going, okay, but overcorrection just puts us in a bad spot as well. And so finding that median that goes, hey, this is what it looks like to do it well, I think is critical.
Right. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I got into law enforcement shortly after Rodney King incident happened. And I had a meeting the other day with a community group, and I told them, I'm tired. I am tired of seeing that kind of crap.
Right.
Excuse my language. I'm tired of seeing cops do that kind of stuff, because it does no good. It happened conservatively 900 miles away from where we're at, and it affects my cops.
Yeah.
And we had nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
I think I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the root cause of that particular incident is, but I think as leaders, we have got to take very serious control over the culture in our organizations, and what is allowed behavior and what isn't. And that's hard to do the bigger your agency is, because there's a lot of buffers between me as the CEO and the line officers. But culture has got to be enforced. It's got to be demanded. I've heard it said, I'm a follower of Jocko Willink and extreme ownership, and I've heard it said that it's not what you preach, it's what you tolerate.
Yeah.
And that's 100% true. And I think that's where us as leaders have a hard time. The further your organization separates you from the bottom tier.
Yeah.
When I can't imagine. I know how it is for me with the department. I've got an authorized strength of 231 sworn cops, and there's 3 levels between me and the patrolman. And I know how my message either is or isn't delivered through those tiers. And then I also know how it is or isn't received by that bottom tier.
Right.
I can't imagine in an organization as large as Memphis how much more difficult that is, but it's got to happen. We've got to do it.
Yeah. Well, and I think, as you say that, Chris, one of the things I think is, as a society, and we know this is a society because we hate it when people generalize and group, but we do that with law enforcement right now. If one thing happens one place, all cops are bad. And I think just as a society in general, we have to get back to, hey, the rules apply across the board. So if we don't want groupings, if we don't want overgeneralization, then let's not do it to our law enforcement either. Let's go, hey, listen, if that's an incident, let's address it. But I think one of the things now, and the cops that I work with, my son's a cop, I work with a ton of cops all the time, is there is this sense of like, hey, don't think the worst of me instantly because you heard something else bad. Like, you wouldn't want me to do that to you. But it's funny, we have this kind of 2-scale system right now where, hey, I'm an individual and don't put me in a box. But then we throw law enforcement in a box and go, well, everybody is, and you all do. And I think if we would just treat each other with grace and fairness, I think some of those things would be dynamically different almost instantly.
I think so too. And I think the best thing that could ever happen is if the entire internet went down, because we have forgotten how to talk to one another.
Yeah.
This social media stuff where I can be, down in my mother's basement, typing all kinds of foul things to somebody that I've never seen before, don't know anything about. it is what has gotten us to this point where we can't look at each other as human beings and see that, every one of my cops is a human
Right.
being who has feelings, who has goals, who has dreams, aspirations, family that is counting on them, family that is supporting them, all this stuff, just like everybody else does, just
Right.
like the people that are listening to this podcast when we're done with it. They have the same things you do. Yeah, we've got a huge responsibility. We've got a very important job that has become more and more difficult. In the 29 years that I've done this job, the last 3 years have been the most difficult
Yo, I bet.
for me as an individual and for our profession. And some of that's our own fault. Um, but I think what's lost is, of the, like here, we had 140,000 plus calls for service last year, and we used force in 250.
That's crazy.
250. That's like 0.02% of our contacts. And
Right.
that's just if you base it on the calls for service. Now, if you based it on every person we contacted during those calls for service, you're talking about us using force maybe 1,000% of the time.
Right.
And when even in that 250 uses of force that we had last year, and it's 250 plus, the majority of those were totally perfect. I mean,
Right.
perfect's a strong word, but they're righteous uses of force. It was appropriate. The level was appropriate. The
Right.
conduct of the officers before, during, and after was appropriate. So I mean, maybe I can't even tell you what percentage of those that would require additional training, maybe resulted in some discipline, and that kind of a thing. And that's just my agency.
Right.
You multiply that times all the other agencies around here and all the cops that are doing great work every day. And I think it's right to expect us to get it right. It's right to expect us not to do what happened in Memphis, not what happened to Rodney King, those kind of things, and the others in between. It's absolutely right to expect that. And it's right to expect us as leaders to hold our personnel accountable if and when they do that. But it's also right for us to ask you to remember that they're human beings and that 99.99999% of the time, they're getting it right. Show
Right.
me another industry where that's the case.
Well, the other thing I would say is that I think part of the correction comes down to as much as, and I do think I agree with you. We hold each other accountable. We hold our police accountable. But I think the guy in the basement needs to be held accountable by his people too, and go, hey man, knock it off. Because what we do right now is we let people just vent like crazy, and their communities don't call them to accountability. They don't say, hey man, do you know that person? Have you tried that? We just let that go. And my call to society as a whole is, hey, police your own people as well.
Right.
You want policing to change? Do a better job of calling out your own people when they're knuckleheads, and you'll see the policing dynamic change incredibly. Because a lot of times on the calls that I'll ride with, I notice if the friend, the family member would just pull their person aside and say, "Hey, you're being completely unreasonable," then the police officer who has no relationship wouldn't be the one who's trying to do it, without a basis of love and affection and respect. Whereas if mom, dad, brother, sister, somebody said, "Hey, man, just knock it off," the de-escalation increases so much, man. And so one of the things that for me is for society to go, hey, yes, let's call policing to greater things, but let's call each other to greater things. That'll help the policing out dramatically as well.
Right. Well, and I think setting expectations for one another as human beings. I'll tell you right now, my dad set some pretty high expectations for me and my behavior towards others that I think were right. You didn't talk to authority figures the way you do now. You
Right.
didn't disrespect authority figures the way you do now. And I think that's part of the issue. That we just again, it comes back to treating one another with grace.
Yeah.
We're not perfect. None of us is perfect. I'm not perfect. Heck, I don't get a lot of my internal decisions in my organization right all the time. I'm not the best leader that ever walked the planet by any stretch. But I think if we remember that we're human beings and that, you know, if we show one another a little bit of love, I think it goes a long way. And I ain't trying to get all, John Lennon here, but, I think there's some truth in that philosophy. Um,
It really is, and we talk about it from time to time in different groups. I mean, there's a term, Imago Dei, which just says seeing people made in the image of God. And I know people have different faiths and all that, but it comes back to when you see the intrinsic value in a human, it changes the way you interact with them. And we've gotten so far away from that. And I would say one of the challenges that I think is out there is I think we as a people think so lowly of ourselves that we then think lowly of others. And not that I think we need pride in there, but I do think we need to grapple with, hey, what am I worth? Because I see people doing things that I think if you knew what you were worth, you would never do that. But you're so convinced by something, somebody, somewhere, that you're not worth anything. So then you do things that are worthless. And I'd be like, man, we can recapture human value for each other, but also internally. And again, not being hippies and wearing a bell bottom, but really going, hey, what am I worth? Like, I think, man, that could be huge. So, well, let me switch gears a little bit because I want to kind of hit on, some of the things. What's been in being in law enforcement cost you personally and the people that you love? Like,
you know,
a 30-year career. What have you had to pay for?
I am not the same person I was before I started this job. And some of that is for the better. I was the shy kid who wouldn't talk to you. Military brats really come in two flavors. They're either the super shy or they're extremely outgoing.
Right.
There's a few in the middle, but those are usually what you end up with.
Yeah.
And I was in the shy side. I mean, so like right now, thinking about however many hundreds of thousands, millions of people that might watch this.
Yes.
I don't want to downplay your podcast, but I mean, 29, 30 years ago, there's no way I would have ever done this.
Yeah.
Getting up in front of my officers and talking at a retirement ceremony or a promotion ceremony, a graduation, there's no way I would have ever done that. But other parts of me that I wish hadn't changed throughout my career is, becoming a little bit less sensitive, becoming a little bit more, I guess, like a callus on the heart at times. You see so much trauma, you see so much evil, is the only way I can describe it,
Yeah.
in the world, and it's hard not to become somewhat calloused. I think in the last 8 or 9 years, I've been able to wear some of that away, because I'm not out on the street every day like my cops are. But they don't get that advantage. They don't get the advantage of seeing different perspective, talking to, I talk to community groups now in a positive way about positive things, where they're not going to those meetings as often as I am. We do send them to the meetings so they can see and hear that. But let's just face it, nobody calls the police because they're having a great day.
Right.
I mean, my kid just got straight A's. We'd like you to come over and celebrate. That just doesn't happen. So I think those are the things that it cost me, personality wise. But the other thing I've learned is that you can't make everybody happy.
Right.
You just can't. And some people are just going to go do that kind of a thing, and there's not a whole lot of control you have over it. So you just got to do the best you can every day. And I think that's another thing that I learned throughout my 30 years almost in law enforcement, is that there's certain things you can control and certain things you can't control.
Right.
And if you want to survive this job, the key is to let go of those things that you can't control. And that's the hard part.
Sure. Yeah, it is. So tell me about some of the biggest surprises or struggles moving into the chief role, right? So all these other roles that you were in, and now you're chief. What were some of the things that you were like, man, that's new, or okay, that's a shift I got to make?
I think it's funny because I think back over my career, every promotion I got, I thought I had that job figured out before I got it. I was an acting sergeant, or I was acting captain, or I was acting chief. So I know what that job entails. The truth is, no matter which level it is, you have no idea. You have no idea what you're stepping into until you're actually in those shoes. And that is really, really true at the top level. I think one of the hardest things for me is, I have a very close friend group. But what I've learned is even within that friend group internally in law enforcement, once you become chief, it's different.
Yeah.
It is different. You can try to pretend like it isn't. You can try to continue your relationships as though it isn't, but it is different. Every person in the organization is looking at you and listening to every word you say
Right.
and parsing those words, sometimes to the betterment of yourself in the organization and sometimes not. And you just got to be really careful. I think that's the biggest thing is the relationships that change. You don't necessarily lose them. It's not like I don't talk to any of those people and we don't have, friend conversations. But even in those conversations, I find myself, oh, I shouldn't talk about this. I shouldn't say that. And it's not a true friendship where you can just say what you think.
Yeah. Have you found a group of people that you can entrust those conversations with?
I have. I've been fortunate.
Mm.
Colorado Association of Chiefs of Police has what they call a chief circle. We have a psychologist on the association that, in fact, we just had a meeting about an hour before we got together today, Mike, and it's an area where it's only chiefs and the psychologist, so it's kind of a group therapy session.
Yeah.
You can talk about different things, and it's hugely beneficial. I think, I'm not the best Christian you'll ever see, but I think my faith helps me a lot too to deal with some of those things. I'm not certainly a model of Christian behavior at times, but I think my faith in God and Jesus helps me to deal with a lot of these things and help it be like water off a duck's back at times.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Well, good. Well, what about this? I've got a couple like kind of law enforcement career type questions. One, what do you think is absolutely necessary to be an effective chief? And then the follow-up one's going to be, if someone's considering law enforcement, how would you tell them to prepare? So kind of those two extremes. What would you say first to be an effective chief? Someone's going, hey, I aspire to that. It's something that I want to do. How do they prepare for that? What can they do now to make them ready when it's time?
There's a lot of things. Education, you need your education. In most departments, you're going to have at least a master's degree. Start now. Don't wait to the last minute. You might actually see a lot more return for your investment if you start earlier in your career.
Yeah.
I didn't do that. I wasn't much of a school kid. I think I mentioned earlier I couldn't be a fighter pilot because I didn't pay attention in class. But so there's that. I think the other thing is I believe in the philosophy I talked about Jocko Willink of extreme ownership. And you've got to take ownership for everything around you as you move through your career. That doesn't mean just the chief. Although I own what happens in this organization. Everything that happens here is a byproduct of what I do or don't do. But you as an individual can start adopting that philosophy that you are in control of what happens around you. You are responsible for the events that surround you in your life. And I think that the people that do that are much more successful. The guy who looks back and says, that's not my fault. That's this guy's fault or whatever. They aren't successful. And I'll give you a perfect example because that was me. In the first 10 years of my career, that's how the department's out to get me. They don't do this, they don't do that. It was always they. And I had a really, really good friend one time look at me and just tell me, I'm tired of hearing you complain.
Yeah.
He said it in a little bit different language. And I was like, forget you, man. You're just being a jerk. And I went home and I thought about it. And I said, you know what? He is absolutely right. All I do is complain. And from that day forward, I'd like to say it was like turning a switch. It wasn't quite that quick. But from that day forward, I started looking at me and where I was going wrong and what the decisions I was making and how that was influencing everybody else around me. And if he hadn't have told me that, I wouldn't be sitting in the chair I am today.
Yeah. It always amazes me how much power we give away when we complain and find excuses, and we don't realize it, right? We're like, oh, I'm the victim. to choose to be the victim is to become the victim in a lot of those circumstances, and to go,
Absolutely.
I'm not giving that much power away. Like, I'm going to take responsibility, because then I get to have the life that I want to have. I think that's critical. I love hearing you say that. And
What I think is sad too, though, is we talk about officer safety and law enforcement all the time. You know, if one of my friends went out there and was turned gun side to a suspect, I would tell him immediately, hey, you shouldn't face him that way. Or if he whatever that was going to get him potentially hurt or killed, I would tell him almost immediately. I might even interrupt the transaction he's having with the civilian to say, hey, you need to turn your gun sight away from that guy.
right.
But what I won't tell him when I see him out there complaining and complaining and complaining and blaming everybody else in the organization for what he's doing or how he could control it, what I won't do is step in and tell him, hey, like my buddy did, tell
Right.
me you're the problem, dude, not the organization.
Right.
And we won't do that though. But what's more devastating?
Yeah.
I mean, the odds of me getting hurt and killed are not nearly as high as me destroying my career.
Right.
Believe me,
And all the relationships around you. Because it's
right,
not just a
yeah,
career-based thing, that
because
impacts the relationship.
the chiefs, and I worked for very good chiefs throughout my career, but they wouldn't have probably given me the time of day to be a sergeant if I hadn't changed myself.
Yeah.
And nor should they have, because what kind of a sergeant am I going to be?
Yeah.
What kind of a leader am I going to be if that's the way I look at things, is that it's everybody else's fault, not mine?
Yeah.
And that's what I think this extreme ownership comes in. It's important. And you can't, when I was in the Navy, they talked about you can delegate authority, but you can't delegate responsibility.
That's right.
And that it goes from me as the chief to the individual level.
Yeah.
You cannot delegate away your responsibility, and you do, believe it or not, have a responsibility to the organization you work for. And that is to try to make it better, and is try to work within the rules of that organization. And I think that the people that listen to this message, or that have friends that tell them, or they're a better human being than I was and don't do it anyway, they're the ones that are going to be successful.
Yeah.
And they're the ones that are going to put themselves in a position to be the chief, deputy chief, sergeant, whatever it is that they want to do. And they're going to have a highly effective unit when they do that.
Yeah, I love it. How about somebody considering going into law enforcement? What would you call them to? This is how to prepare, and even maybe very practically, this is how to apply. Because I know, I think back, and it wasn't that long ago. If you had 50 openings, you had 3,000 applicants, and now you got 50 openings, you got 32 and a half. And you're going, what do I do with the half?
Right.
What would you say to people considering entering into law enforcement of any age or background?
Well, first off, I would say it's a great career. It is challenging, but it's a good kind of challenging if you have the right mindset. I mean, you're not coming in every day making donuts.
Right.
The old, some people probably are too young to remember the, got to make the donuts commercials.
That's right.
And it's just a monotonous thing. Every day is different. When you come to work as a cop, every single day is different. Different good, different bad, but it's different. So I think that's the thing you got to look at. It is more challenging today, but I think, what's funny, and I even heard this in the military, you look back over your career and you think, oh my goodness, what's happened? But for the people that are just starting, I think they're a little bit more intelligent than I was when I started my career 30 years ago. They're trained a lot better. They understand the world differently than I did. We didn't have social media. I didn't know what was going on. It would have taken, a couple of weeks or days anyway for news on one side of the continent to get to the other. It just wasn't. I remember when headline news and CNN first started 24-hour news coverage. It just didn't happen back in the day. So I think that they are more in tune that way. So they're probably a little bit more adaptable than we were. So that's what I would tell them, is it's a good job despite the challenges. And I think that they're probably better prepared than we were to do it. So how do you become a cop? I guarantee you, no matter where you live, there's a department somewhere that's looking for some bodies. So you just go down there and apply. My daughter is an apprentice electrician, and when she graduated, had decided that's what she wanted to do, but she brings me an application that she wants to fill out to go work at a shoe store after she graduates for the summer job. I said, why are you wasting your time doing that? Just go apply to be an electrician. So she does, and she's an electrician now. But and that's what I would say to the people that are interested in doing this job. You have to be 21 in most states, not every state, but go get a job, maybe join the military in the interim if you're 17, 18 years old looking for this. And then as soon as you're old enough and you can do it, you get out of the military, just start applying. And don't take no for an answer.
Yeah.
You may not. I didn't get hired the first few agencies that I went through. So you fill out the application. Usually there's a written test. Sometimes there's a physical agility test. We have one of those that you have to pass. So obviously, being in shape and being prepared for that is important. I think one thing that is lost on, I'm going to sound like an old guy now, but the younger generation is how to dress for an interview.
Yeah.
Wear a suit, wear a tie, wear shoes that you have to tie. Don't wear slip-ons. Don't wear your hey dudes to the interview. I think those kind of things. Have a haircut. Don't come in with a beard. Even if the department allows you to grow a beard, shave it for the interview. Show a little bit of discipline. Have a good haircut. Do a lot of departments. We offer a interview like prep course that we put on for our applicants, and we don't give them questions that are going to be on the board, but we give them ideas to think about. Talking about, what's funny is when I came through the academy, what is one of your major faults? They usually word it a different way. That would be one of the questions they would ask, and they would tell you, take a negative and turn it into a positive.
Right.
So, I'm always early to everything. Well, come on, man. Don't use that. Just take a negative and say, for a while I struggled with whatever. But this is what I did. This is how I turned around. This is how I've changed moving forward. And give real answers. Don't be afraid to give real answers. Now, if there's some real answers that are not going to work out for you very well, but generally speaking, the average human being has flaws.
Right.
And we know what those flaws are. They're not a secret to us. We might want to hide them, but talk about those, talk about life experiences. And that's one of the issues where I think we as the older generation didn't prepare the younger generation very much, as giving them life experiences.
Yeah.
I
think of that application process and I go, man, don't hide anything. Like if you're going to get the job, get it based on who you are, because in my experience, they're going to find out. And the other part is, why play a part? That takes so much stress to go, oh, hang on, who was I with Chris? Who was I with Mike? Just be you. And if you can get the job, you'll get it. And if you can't, you find something.
And that's the key, is because you're more likely, as long as we're not talking about felony criminal behavior,
right?
You're more likely to get fired not get selected because you didn't tell me about it,
right,
than you would have been had you just told me about it.
Right.
So there, it's a shame, because you'll see candidates that you think would have been pretty good, and they'll either lie or leave out stuff in their application or interview, and then we find out in the background or in the psychological or in the polygraph, and I'm kicking them to the curb,
right?
Because I can't hire somebody that's untruthful.
Yeah. I talked to one of our polygraph guys down here, and he said, listen, the whole thing I'm trying to figure out is, are you lying to me or not? And what kind of integrity you have? He goes, I'm not worried so much about what you've done as long as you haven't had felony stuff. He said, but these people that I'm interviewing, he says, I just want to know, are you telling me the truth? He goes, because that is what matters to us in law enforcement. It's not an impeccable record, and I never drank and I never got in trouble in school. And it's, are you telling me the truth? Because people of integrity can police well. People who are going to lie at the beginning will lie in their career, and you just can't have that.
Right. Yeah. And especially in this day and age, the expectations that are rightfully placed on us, that's where we find ourselves. You can't lie coming in the door. You can't lie while you're in the house.
Right.
You certainly shouldn't lie even after you're gone.
Right.
But those first two for sure you shouldn't be doing.
Yeah. Well, let's
So
do this. I want to honor your time. I know I don't want to take up too much of it. How about as we close, just give me 2 to 3 minutes. You can say anything you want about law enforcement, about life, about faith, about anything, you know, your favorite green chili recipe. I don't care, man. You got 2 to 3 minutes. Just knock yourself out. What would you say to an audience that's listening?
I think what I would like to say is just number one, it would be really nice if we could just have a little bit more grace for the work that our cops are doing.
Yeah.
And it is important to focus on the bad stuff that happens. It is important to make sure that it doesn't continue to happen. And I think most
So give
cops.
me this, Chris, real quick, because I think I love what you're saying. What would that look like? What would more grace look like? Give me some like real practical ways that, because if I'm listening, right, I'm going, yeah. But tell me what that could look like.
I think it looks like a couple different things. Number one, stop. Um, and what's interesting is in our community, we really don't face this. It's the national sentiment that everybody feels. We have pretty strong support here in Pueblo, and it is an example. We just passed a public safety sales tax that allowed us to buy equipment and keep our authorized strength up to 231, and 75% of the voters voted for it.
That's awesome.
So we have awesome support here, and not everybody, but the vast majority of our community absolutely supports us. Our mayor does, our council does, but I think those kind of things, when your department needs stuff, support them.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying that you just write a blank check and they get to buy whatever they want, but when there's really a need, I think it's important for the community to show support in those ways. I think, just waving at us, telling us, I'm kind of, humbled when people come up, and we get it a lot nowadays, and tell us thank you for your service.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't a big deal to tell somebody that, but it's a big deal to hear it. And our cops need to hear that. I think sticking up for our cops when other people are bad mouthing them is another way. And I don't mean physically, and I don't mean confrontationally, but we'll see it in our social media where people will put some pretty interesting comments in there. I'll just put it that way. And we do have members of our community that will snap back and say, no, not here. That's not how they roll, and this kind of thing. And I think also just maybe not demanding everybody gets fired right away over every little thing. Now, I'll be honest, with the Tyree Nichols thing in Memphis, I didn't waste any time saying those cops should not be cops anymore.
Right.
I didn't waste no time. I had the chief in Memphis saying it was, I think the word she used was inhuman.
Right.
I think Director Ray from the FBI said it was the most horrendous thing he had ever seen. And then the DA likened it to Rodney King. I put out a message before that video even made. I mean, how much do I have to hear to know that it's got to be horrendous?
Right.
And I caught a little bit of flack from some other chiefs and some other officers outside of my organization, but I didn't catch any flack from the people in my organization.
Right.
Because they all agree we've got to call that kind of behavior out, and that's where we have to show grace to the people that we serve, is to not be afraid to say that's wrong.
Right.
And sooner rather than later. And then I saw the video the next day, and I was like, yeah, there is no way to support any of that.
Right.
There's no way, even the initial contact.
Well, and not only no way, but no need to. There's no need to support what happened in that circumstance.
Right. And I mean, I can't imagine running up on a car for reckless driving that way.
Right.
I mean, even the initial contact makes no sense. So it'll be interesting to see what if there was other issues afoot, and I'm not casting any claim to know one way or the other, but I can't see a need to rush up on a traffic violation like that. Careless driving and reckless driving is a traffic violation. It's not even a misdemeanor crime. Now, if he had hit somebody, a human being, and caused SBI or something, that might be a different story. But so I think this grace thing goes both ways. We as leaders, chiefs and sheriffs, need to make sure that our people are showing grace to the people that they serve. We talk about it internally a lot. Treat them like they're your mother, your brother, your father, your sister, your aunt, your uncle. I mean, not everybody had a great childhood, but most of us have at least one family member that we cared about.
Right.
Treat them like they're that person.
Yeah.
And I think that we can build those bridges back and get off social media. I think it's the bane of our existence right now. When you say things on that you would never say to somebody's face.
Right.
But the problem is now people are saying it to other people's faces.
Right.
And we are now all of a sudden emboldened. I've said it for so many days, weeks, months, years on social media that now I can just blurt it out to you in your face, and there's no respect for other human beings anymore.
Yeah.
I think that's where it really boils down to is, if you wouldn't tell your mother or your father those things, maybe you shouldn't say it to somebody else.
Yeah. I'll never forget, there's a Bible verse that talks about how we treat people. And it's like, treat younger women like they're your sister, and treat older men like they're your dad, and treat, and it goes through this whole thing. And it's exactly what you're talking about is, instead of taking them out of a narrative, put them in the most affectionate narrative that you got. Okay, I'm talking to someone that's older. How would I talk to my dad? Oh, with respect and honor and patience. How would I talk to my little brother? Okay, well, I would try to equip him and call him to greater things. And if we treated each other that way, man, that dynamically shifts all this stuff. And you're right, social media may have been the door that opened it up to where now we're saying it face to face, and it's just too far.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's a couple of ways that we can do that. I think, I don't know that every time I walk into a room, I need everybody in that room to tell me thanks for what I'm doing. Right. But every now and then have somebody walk up to you and appreciate what you're doing is important. It's a little awkward, I think, for the cop.
Yeah.
But I think it's good to hear that.
Yeah, I do
and
too.
I bet you there's a lot of cops in Memphis right now that could stand to hear that.
Yeah, to have somebody come up and say, hey, I know that doesn't represent you. So right. Thank you for what you're doing. That's huge. Well, Chris, it's been great. I appreciate your time, man. I love it. I didn't realize we had so much in common. I mean, yeah. I grew up an Army brat. Didn't know. I've only met like 3-4 people in my life who even knew where Masawa was. Yeah. So I think that's pretty cool. And you probably know this because you're friends with my older brother. My biological dad was a cop in Pueblo for 20-25 years. So all kinds of interactions. Sometime if I get down that way, maybe we'll catch a slopper together.
Absolutely. I think I like Coors Tavern. So
all right, sounds good to me, buddy. I'll talk to you later.
All right. Thank you. We'll see you. Bye.